Welcome to the Rebel and Be Well podcast, hosted by Christa Rymal, registered nurse, founder and CEO of Lifestyle Medicine Retreat Center, The Point Retreats, which is located amidst the woods and waters of northern Minnesota. During her podcast, Christa will interview experienced and successful healthcare professionals on outside-the-box health topics. During their time together, they will have in-depth discussions with trusted medical and health and wellness leaders to discover what they do to stay well, using traditional and non-traditional health practices. Experts will share not only what, but why they practice the holistic lifestyle medicine they do and the science that backs their less than mainstream ideas. You'll hear the real and relatable personal health struggles of healthcare providers and what rebelling outside of the traditional healthcare system did to better their lives, careers, and health. Tune in to listen and learn the mind, body, spirit practices from conventional health experts who share hope and inspiration from honest stories of healing while reflecting the scientific-based evidence to wisely guide the inner rebel inside you. It's time to rebel and be well.
Mariah and Mark, welcome to the Rebel and Be Well podcast. I would like to introduce our audience to you by sharing a bit of your bio and your background. Mariah Rooney is a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in treating the complex challenges that arise as a result of traumatic stress, attachment trauma, intergenerational trauma, and disassociation in children and adults. She is also an adjunct professor in the School of Social Work at the University of St. Thomas and Winona State University, and a consultant with the Center for Treatment of Developmental Trauma Disorders. As a previous fellow at the Trauma Center at JRI, she received extensive training in trauma and supported various project and research efforts. Additionally, Mariah is a registered yoga teacher with extensive training in trauma-sensitive and culturally informed yoga and meditation practices through Warriors at Ease, Prison Yoga Project, Insight Prison Project, Mind Body Solutions, and Trauma-Sensitive Yoga. Her writing and research has explored post-traumatic outcomes among combat veterans with histories of interpersonal violence, trauma-sensitive education, as well as outcomes among traumatized youth in an outpatient setting using a sensory-based intervention. Along with Mariah, we also have Mark Schneider. Mark Schneider is a creator of Live It, a comprehensive behavior and habit change program, and personal trainer specializing in injury recovery and return to play. With a 20-year comprehensive background in functional medicine, nutritional counseling, bodywork, fitness training, and behavior therapy, Mark supports clients so they can support themselves, empowering them with the skills and confidence to overcome physical, emotional, and habitual roadblocks on the road to success. So Mariah and Mark, thank you for taking time to join me today on the Rebel and Be Well podcast. I appreciate your time. I know it's a hot commodity these days as you're both very busy professionals and individuals. As The Point seeks to provide new opportunities and outlets for people to process and release past and current stressors and traumas, I was elated to find both of you and trauma-informed weightlifting. We believe movement and exercise is medicine, but not just for the body, and equally as important for the mind. Stress and trauma take a mental and physical toll on well-being, and Mariah and Mark have created new programs, workshops, and tools to resolve these common modern-day occurrences. They continue to research and explore how this new concept can benefit patients, clients, health and wellness professionals, and even healthcare professionals. I look forward to learning more about both of you and your training and being part of the workshop ahead at the Self-Esteem Brands headquarters in February. So I'd like to start by asking each of you, and I'll start with Mariah. Mariah, can you tell me what drew you into social work, and then specifically addressing the concerns around trauma and stress in individuals?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having us. It's really exciting to be here talking to you, and it's been so fun exploring our conversations and thinking about bringing some of our work to the Self-Esteem Brands crew. My journey into social work looked a little non-traditional, if you will. I was in a different career path and had decided to do some studying in various approaches to trauma-informed yoga, and was teaching in different settings, in an incarceration setting, in community treatment, in rehab. and was really enjoying that work. And particularly when I did a deep dive into teaching and doing some research at a BA, wanted to find a way to go deeper in the work, and also wanted to go deeper in the work with a real commitment to taking a social justice approach to whatever it was that I was going to do on that journey. And so I started by studying East-West psychology and then transitioned into social work, and was finding ways to bring those various interests together with the ultimate goal of working with folks who had been experienced, a large amount of oppression and marginalization and further harm as a result of systems that kind of continued to beget trauma. And I didn't know how to go about doing that work without being really attentive to and attuned to and drawing in the body into that work, which is how, I got to where we are today in this work.
And Mark, how about you? What drew you into the various things that you're doing now? One being one of a co-facilitator, co-leader of the trauma-informed weightlifting program.
I would love to say that my path was as intentional as Mariah's, but listening to her story, mine doesn't sound as intentional. I started 20 years ago, and to be honest, I think I started because I just happened to be good at doing what I do, and I said yes to every opportunity that came up to me, in front of me. So I did a lot of apprenticeships. I've worked in retreat centers. I've worked in the jungles of Belize. I've kind of just traveled the world in order to learn all these pieces. And as I look back and try to figure out what specifically my talent is, I think the one skill that I have that probably works from the trauma-informed perspective as well as through my entire career is I'm really good at listening.
It's a great quality.
For whatever reason, don't know why, I just have this skill, but I just am good at listening, and it's paid off from a coaching perspective, working in clinical settings, working with the trauma-informed perspective, and so on. So it just happens to be that I just, for whatever reason, had that talent.
Mariah, can you explain to us what this concept of trauma-informed means? Can you translate for people who this is a new term for?
Sure. The vague answer is it means a lot of things. And one of the things that we talk about, and is a core tenet in our work for trauma-informed weightlifting, is that to us, it means to do less harm and then to do good. And that a part of being trauma-informed means actively paying attention to the ways in which we continue to participate in harm. By, our implicit biases, by not being aware, by not being conscious, by participating in systems that cause harm in a variety of different ways. And that, we start there because we recognize that we could set out on this trauma-informed journey with a whole lot of intentionality to say, I'm going to learn a lot about trauma. I'm going to learn about neurobiology and the nervous system and intergenerational trauma and trauma treatments and all of these things. And that is critical and necessary and very much a part of being trauma-informed. And that if we start there without first addressing the systems and patterns and behaviors and different things that continue to re-traumatize folks or to traumatize folks or to exacerbate stress, that we are simultaneously participating in that kind of, or colluding in that ongoing issue, while then saying yes, and but I've learned all this stuff about trauma, and then I'm changing the way that I see things and approach things. So I say that because I think we think it's important to recognize those two pieces. What I would add to that is that, there's a lot of trauma-informed principles that are pretty commonly shared in the field, right? Like having a basic kind of foundational understanding of trauma, understanding all of the ways in which it can manifest, the disproportionate impacts of trauma, what it might look like in the body, how to adjust both kind of the mindset or lens that you see things through, right? So it's this lens of, what happened to you instead of what's wrong with you.
Right.
Your behavior or your body or something that's happening or manifesting here in front of me is telling me a story about some experience or experiences that you've had. And that mindset shift and that frame is really necessary. And that also, it means doing something about it then, right? Like, how do we support people by taking a more curious and adaptive and responsive and inclusive response. And it can look a lot of different ways in different settings, whether you're in a gym or if you're in a healthcare setting or you're in a school, in the military. And those adaptations look different, I think, that need to also be culturally responsive.
Yeah. And in a time when I think almost all of us have had some form of increased stress, people have probably had greater degree of different traumatic events happening to them, especially in the time of the pandemic. I think there is this quickness to want to dismiss, I've experienced any trauma. Oh, that's not me. Like, mine's not that bad. And then I think there's also this kind of foreign concept around weightlifting, right? So people think of weightlifting in sometimes really unique ways. Like, well, I'm not a competitive weightlifter, so how could weightlifting benefit me? So for people who are kind of like, well, have I been through a trauma? Have I not? I'm not someone who is maybe as comfortable lifting weights or not. So is this for me or not? Like, how would you address that? Like, who is trauma-informed weightlifting for? Who's really can it be applied to?
When the question comes up of what have I experienced a trauma or no, I haven't experienced a trauma, that's for the people that are going through or have experienced a trauma, that's part of the process of recognition. But even if we take a step back and remove the label of trauma and just look at manifestations that it may surface, higher anxiety levels, higher depression levels, difficulty sleeping, physiological GI issues, all these different things that may manifest because of an invisible insult to the body. That may have been traumatic and may not have been traumatic, but the manifestation is, it's there. So if we take away the word trauma, and then the question is, how is my tolerance level? How is my sleep? Do I seem to be very edgy? Do I seem to be highly agitated? And you begin to balance out all those factors, then we can begin to look at, even though you may or may not define it as trauma, it's the symptomology is going to be simpler or clearer. So then when looking at weightlifting and the application of weightlifting, we chose the name, even though it was somewhat contentious to settle on weightlifting, but we separated the word weightlifting. Like, there's the sport of weightlifting, and then there's the act of lifting weights. And so if we just categorize that as any kind of resistance training, then trauma-informed weightlifting, or weightlifting in general, for the purposes of trying to manage a lot of these internal and external stresses, is for anyone interested in using that type of work. Some people may gravitate toward yoga. Some people may gravitate toward music. It doesn't. There isn't a clear category that everyone will fit into, and there's nothing particularly magical about any of those categories, including weightlifting. If you are interested in weightlifting, if you are interested in resistance, if you are interested in the exploration of physical strength, and then using it to generalize into the psychological, using examples that will teach yourself that you can overcome physical obstacles that may be frightening at some point, but then you built up the tolerance, built up the ability to overcome it, and then tell yourself, I started not being able to do this and now I can.
Right.
That is a very tangible example of progress that weightlifting offers, in addition to using resistance training or weightlifting also offers the ability to work against something. So you have a weight, you have an external resistance, you have an external stress that you are able to manipulate. Sometimes the stressor will win. Sometimes the weight will be too heavy. Sometimes you will be too tired for a weight that you've done before, but then you can come back and you can overcome, and the story that you get to tell yourself will change and it will evolve. The quick answer is trauma-informed weightlifting is for anyone interested in weightlifting for the reasons that Mariah said. The trauma-informed component is good for all.
Yeah.
Coming in from a sense of curiosity and recognizing that there's harm that's being done, even though you're trying to do good.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the weightlifting part is good for all people interested.
Right. What kind of light bulbs do you see going off for people as they're going through this training?
One thing is the most tangible that I have seen coaching has been the recognition of strength. And one of the ways that in our training we frame the idea of strength is a product of trust. And so it's not only a product of like just physical muscles contracting and rebuilding and so on. It's building the ability to trust yourself to make an attempt, trust yourself to potentially fail, trust yourself to recover, trust those around you if you need help. So when you put all of those factors together, the concept of strength being the biggest light bulb that manifests will manifest not only physically, but also psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, however the person may frame the experience. So the coaching aspect of it provides more context to that idea so that person can recognize, oh, I wasn't able to do this before, now I can, or, oh, I was scared of coming into a group class and now I feel confident walking into a group class. So it's not only the physical aspect, it's there's more to the experience. The consistency of it, the work of it, the recovery from it for those that feel more comfortable pushing than they do relaxing.
Right.
But recognizing the benefit of the relaxation, building the comfort on the relaxation, and along those lines also play a factor.
Yeah. Thank you. That's very helpful to understand that. Mariah, can I ask you from your standpoint, I know that you are also integrating this into healthcare systems. So what do you see evolving there as you start to use trauma-informed weightlifting?
Yeah, we're in the very beginning stages of working with a healthcare system in the Boston area, developing a program that would support staff, healthcare personnel, with the goal of expanding the program out to support patients in the future as well. But recognizing that, part of taking a trauma-informed approach to answer your early question is also understanding that systems are impacted. And so attending to kind of the collective nervous system of a system is a really important starting point. And as we all know, our healthcare systems are completely taxed right now, beyond taxed. And the level of chronic stress, toxic stress, and trauma that is being held within these systems and all of these healthcare providers is, I think, unprecedented. And so we're going to be working to offer, through trainers who have been trained in taking a trauma-informed approach, to work with healthcare personnel in that setting. And part of our approach there is also to recognize that one thing that happens with ongoing stress and trauma is that it's oftentimes you are in an ongoing state of survival, right? And people sometimes need to stay in that mode of functioning in order to put one foot in front of the other, to go to work every day. And so, disarming them of that, if you will, is not always helpful in the moment until they're in a place of more safety and stabilization. And so a part of what we're aiming to do is really recognize that, hey, this is kind of the situation that you're in right now. And we want to support you in caring for yourself and your nervous system and having some experiences in your body that you are in control of, and to be, responsive in the coach trainer, client relationship in a way that tells them like you get to be the boss here, and there's encouragement around listening to your body and doing work in a setting where there's very little choice right now. Things are happening to people, not with them.
And so where do you see this going in the healthcare space? Like where do you see this growing?
That's a good question. We would love to see programs like this one replicated around the country, supporting personnel, and then, expanding out to also support patients, and also doing research. We're very interested in doing research to continue learning and growing and evolving our work so that we know some of the unique factors that are helpful within healthcare settings, whether that's working with staff, with providers, or with patients. Yeah. And, I'm thinking even just back to my days of teaching yoga and meditation in the BA and doing research there too, that there was so much that was important about kind of ongoing iterations of what we were doing to meet the changing needs of the folks who were participating. And I think the healthcare systems are going to continue to be taxed for some time, and they're going to continue to evolve. I think in the as the pandemic continues, and then also in the aftermath of the pandemic. So how do we learn along the way and adapt things along the way to continue meeting those changing needs.
Okay. During the training, and this is a workshop, right? Is that correct way to say it? A workshop versus a certification. It's more of an educational seminar where you're learning how to approach clients or patients in a more trauma-informed manner. What kind of content are you providing people during the actual workshop? Like, can you give us an example of maybe one of the seminars or talks that you lead and a couple of key talking points in those?
Yeah, I mean, you could call it a workshop, you can call it a training. We are working on building a full certificate program, which will be much more in depth. Right now, our training is about 30 hours.
Okay.
And it's based on a few things. One, creating a foundational knowledge about trauma. And so we talk about neurobiology, we talk about the nervous system, we talk about the impacts of trauma and how they manifest in different ways. A lot of education around trauma as like a foundation to the work that we do in the training. And then we talk a lot about what does it mean to take a trauma-informed approach as a coach or a personal trainer or as a physical therapist or an occupational therapist. We have people with all kinds of different backgrounds who come through the training. So what does that look like when you're engaging in programming, when you're cueing, when you're working on developing goals with clients? Mark does a really wonderful deep dive into the coaching aspect of things, thinking about it from a relational perspective, as well as some of the more kind of even administrative type things. How do you become more trauma informed, and thinking about the physical environment and space that you're in, the music that you play, the language that you use. So there's a lot of exploration in that realm as well. And then we introduce a variety of different concepts to try and help people better understand themselves.
Okay.
Because part of what is often missing in the training for trainers and coaches is a lot of encouragement around understanding who you are as a coach or a trainer. Because we all know that in relationship, no matter what kind of working relationship you're in, we all have stuff that gets poked at, right? That gets drawn out. We have certain kinds of clients or colleagues we have a harder time with. There's reasons for that. There are things that we need to do to learn to draw attention to our, implicit and explicit biases, and like examining our approach and why do we think this way. I think, being able to think about how we think is really important so that we can make choices instead of just reacting or kind of participating in a culture without being more discerning or examined about it. So we focus a lot also on developing more self-awareness and self-attunement, because that is also so important, we think, to being a trauma-informed provider of any kind.
Absolutely. So this workshop that we're going to have in February at Self-Esteem Brand headquarters is going to be the first in-person workshop that you've hosted since the start of the pandemic. Am I stating that accurately? What do you find in the trauma of just being more isolated for people, and when people are now starting to reconnect? What's unfolding there?
It's a timely question, because I have started seeing clients of mine who are vaccinated in person again. And it's been really powerful and also very intense. I think you're going to hear me say the words nervous system a lot, because it's such a central part of our experience and how we move through the world. And I think our nervous systems are in a process of remembering what it's like to be in the presence of other people. And some of what we learned during the pandemic is to brace kind of metaphorically and quite literally against proximity to others, right? That like distance was necessary for safety. And so there's a parallel with trauma around that, right? That like oftentimes, sometimes trauma manifests actually by getting closer to the person who's harming you as a survival tactic, but oftentimes there's a bracing and a distancing and a break. And I think we have collectively experienced what it's like to have that break and that disconnect, and our bodies and our nervous systems are going to need a lot of support around remembering. What is it like to be around other people? Can we remember what it's like to be safe, right? Or it may not feel safe, right? And then what do we do if it doesn't feel safe, or if it isn't safe, right? We're still in the middle of a pandemic. And how do we kind of stay present with one another and co-regulate in that to the best of our ability? And then on the other side of things, it has been so powerful. I mean, I've had clients walk into my office, and just being in space together has been such an emotional experience for both of us. And a lot of gratitude for what technology allows us to do to stay connected in all of this. There's a lot of powerful things that are happening because of that too. we need contact, we need connection, we need to be in shared space together. And there's a lot of things coming up for people: fear, comfort, relief, terror. I mean, you name it, everything. Mm-hmm.
Those first times of being back together in community, and we've experienced that at our retreats, and we had one the end of August for healthcare professionals. And I asked that question in part because in our group of 25 together, the trauma that was released, even in their own personal introductions, as we were just getting to know one another better, was so profound. And I thought, I kind of was projecting ahead to even in February when we'll all be together again, that process of disarming ourselves, of trying to keep distance in and of itself is a good release and a hard one of trauma for, in particular, a lot of people who've kept that distance. So I know it's really important for you and Mark to create this environment of safety, all-inclusiveness, and trust. And Mark, Mariah, you just did a really good job describing how that is so important right now in the both literal and metaphysical space. But Mark, for you, I know you are taking extra efforts in what you're creating right now to look at creating the most trauma-sensitive spaces physically. Can you tell me what that looks like a little bit when someone's in an in-person training? How do you create that for people?
Everything that Mariah said obviously is correct. But one thing that I have noticed is there is a natural, as much as there is resistance and fear about getting back together, there is also a natural rebound toward that direction. Mm-hmm. Just that for a certain degree, like we use the concept of nervous system, co-regulation and regulating each other's nervous system is something that we are probably physically built for. Like the nervous systems, it's not that we have separate nervous systems. We are an interconnected network. The closer we get to someone, the more the connection builds. And the more we co-regulate. So the more exposure that we get to people, even if from a distance, a smile without a mask on, or feeling that comfort of being within physical proximity to whatever safety, whatever that metric is for you, then I think there's a natural rebound, probably an overcorrection that's happening in certain areas right now. But the gym itself, people initially were somewhat cautious. There was a handful of people that just were ready to go, and part of that demographic was basically knocking on the door while we were closed. Right. And the next demographic that walked through was cautious, and what was interesting was they were more worried about feeling ostracized for wanting to wear a mask while working out.
Sure.
So it's like feeling out from that perspective. But once they walked into a gym, and it's the same fear that people have walking into a gym no matter what, is everyone's staring at me. And the reality is no one is staring at you. No one's paying attention to you because they're all worried that someone's paying attention to them. So everyone's just very self-involved in that moment. The larger gym space has been actually pretty well received in regards to how people come back into the space. They do find corners, they create space when they need to. And I'm speaking specifically about my clientele within the larger gym space. Yep. They ask for help a little bit more. They don't come during busier times, so they manage their schedule a little bit more. The space that's right now being created that I'm breathing in the fumes of right now, the focus of this one is to have my philosophy on space is you are building an active relationship with the physical environment as well as other people. So there is a conversation that's happening between you and space. You create the space, but then the space creates you.
Sure.
And so what I wanted to build was a space that took away as much underlying stressors as possible. So the lights are going to be factored so that they're not that harsh and that your body doesn't have to process harsh lighting. The sound buffering is going to be probably a little bit overkill, but the goal is to remove as much echo as possible. The sight lines have to be very clean so you can see anything and everything at all times. No trash is allowed on the floor because I don't want any question of what is that for those that have histories, especially
Right.
military histories and PTSD with unknown things laying around on the floor.
Sure.
The languages in regards to the marketing is more carefully structured, even the contract agreements, so that someone knows what they're actually signing, and everything along those lines. Is just take away as much ambiguity that the brain is probably unconsciously processing and wondering, so that the person can focus on their particular goal, whatever that goal might be. And it's not a gym that's built for like easy work and being super chill and calm. Like this is I've got 2,000 pounds of iron coming in. I've got machines that are 900 pounds each that are massive. And when you sit inside of them, you feel like you're being coddled, but you have to work. So strength is the goal of this space. It's just I want to take away as much other distraction as there is on an unconscious level so you can really lay into that strength.
Yep. So that can be your focus without all of the other noise pulling you away. Yeah.
Right.
That's a fantastic concept. I have not heard of this occurring in very many gyms, so I think it's brilliant.
So as I was putting this concept together, I started looking through the literature in design, architectural design, interior design, lighting concepts, and so on. And PTSD design within architectural and city planning and so on it exists, but it's so minimal. But the concepts are the ones that are actually built. People love the space. It's a nice, inviting, calm, open space that someone can walk through without feeling agitation, without feeling like they have to look over their shoulder.
Right.
There's openness, but at the same time, there's containment. And all these factors that are coming together are really fascinating. That it's a very tiny part of the design world, but I just started looking through the literature and just pulling out concepts that I can manifest inside the gym,
right?
And using that to inform everything from the colors to the lighting to the level of echo to the decibel level that I'm willing to accept, and so on.
Right. So it can really truly be a healing, safe space for people.
Correct.
Whether they're recognizing it or not, they just walk into it, and it is.
Right. When someone walks in here, I want them to breathe differently because the air is actually different. I've got live plants coming in. I have like 4 or 5 live walls. All of those pieces that create nature within the space. And that's not a new concept. You know, biophilia was, I think, E.O. Wilson introduced the concept of man being more comfortable in nature, man as a species, being more comfortable in nature and trying to bring concepts of nature into man-made structure has been around for decades. It's just, it doesn't play out that often, especially in modern architecture where the user is not the focus of the build. And that's the slight variation that I pulled on this is like, how is the end user, my client, going to feel on every step and when they look in whatever direction they're looking at? What do they see? What are they experiencing? And if you center the client, then the design actually kind of makes itself.
I'm sure you came across the data on the few hospitals that exist globally that have incorporated nature and other elements of, creating more healing space and it reducing length of stay in the hospital. So, I mean, it's profound, right? I mean, it's statistically significant in those settings. And so the same concept could apply to any place you're trying to heal, in a particular heal trauma.
Correct. Absolutely.
Yeah. Mark, could you share, and I'm going to ask Mariah the same thing, could you share a client story where you saw a trauma-informed approach create better success, mentally, physically, spiritually for an individual? Can you just share a story about that, like what that looks like tangibly? And just a very general, obviously no names, no like super specific details, but just, high level, like how that looked to use a trauma-informed approach for a client you were working with.
Sure. Part of it is that we've created this program, and so I've been using the trauma-informed approach consciously and unconsciously for 10 years of coaching. What I have noticed is the difference in recovery for those that are coming in with injury, be it physical injury, any like TBIs, chronic concussion, broken bones, long-term arthritis, and using the trauma-informed approach of being curious about their symptomology, actually listening to their experience. Having a client tell me that they go to a particular doctor, an orthopedist that looks at their knee and they give them a list of restrictions, but they don't listen to what is the client actually trying to do in their life. How are they trying to live? Are those restrictions problems? Or are those restrictions really going to influence the psychological aspect for that person?
Sure.
So then if there is room to be able to then figure out a way for that person to live the life they want, even if they are limited physically, then that becomes the focus of our session. It's like if they're trying to use their legs to climb a mountain and they don't have certain bend in their knee, great, then we just find another way. We increase range in other joints. We accomplish what the client is asking for. And then within whatever physical limits may exist.
Makes sense. And in part of that, does that help them then physically and emotionally release the trauma of whatever injury they're going through so they actually can use muscles that they maybe somewhere in their mind had turned off that they were unable to connect to?
I think what happens is it's not so much giving ability, it's sometimes removing roadblocks.
Okay.
So if they are told they can't bend their knee, therefore they can't run. And then whatever that spiral that starts from them being told they can't, on some level they've already now created other roadblocks to other activities that they may want to do. And so what I've noticed is by saying that there's a way of doing that particular act, it just may not be the traditional way. But you can still climb a mountain, you can still ride a bike, you can still go skydiving, whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. The process of removing the roadblock of, wait, it's still possible, it's just not the same way possible. That allows the question of releasing trauma, quote unquote. I can't speak to clinically. What I can speak to is suddenly they feel more capable.
So it's reframing their story and letting them reshape it as best as their body and mind will let them.
Correct.
Okay. Mariah, how about for you?
A few things come to mind. One is I'm working with clients using trauma-informed weightlifting in a few different ways. One is collaboratively with Mark, right? So we work as a team and working with the client, and there's intentions set around the relationships that are held kind of in that person's care. The other is me just working with clients who happen to weightlift or are interested in starting weightlifting, and then how can they use that to support themselves. And I can give some examples of that. And then, the others for folks who are already working maybe with a trainer or a coach, and then how to do things like practice self-advocacy in those relationships, to talk about their needs. And, some of the coolest things that I have seen is the translation of what happens in the gym into therapy and vice versa.
Oh, sure.
So some of what I find, so both in terms of narrative, right? Like what are the stories that exist and that come up and are kind of triggered or poked at? How do we work with those? How do we process those? And then the narratives that just inherently evolve as someone starts to have powerful experiences with their body in a gym, or feeling into their strength, their power, their agency in that way.
Yeah.
And even that shows up relationally. I've had a client come back and say, oh my God, I sat my coach down and told him that he was making me feel really uncomfortable. And I told him that I really wanted him to take a trauma-informed approach because we had done some preparation for this conversation. and felt really good. And then initially he was really reactive, and then they worked through it. But the process of giving voice to their experience, to not just going through the motions because that they were, what I'm making air quotes right now, but that's what they were supposed to do, right? Or what they believed it was expected of them in that context of a relationship. I also do a lot of things like sensory motor psychotherapy and EMDR and other forms of trauma therapy. And so I've been able to bring embodied experiences in the gym in terms of maybe a certain movement is triggering. Let's say a squat brings up, visceral kind of felt memories of an assault. Okay. Then we can bring that into the trauma processing and therapy and use that physical experience to access that feeling, that sensation, and then do some processing and some work there. On the other side, we use experiences of strength and grounding and resource and power in the gym as resource in therapy. Right. So for example, if I have a client who has identified a certain movement or experience in the gym as making them feel really powerful and agentic and strong, right? And in their body, and I did this thing and I didn't dissociate, right? Then we can translate that into therapy and use that as something that can generalize then and be accessed in both tough stuff that we're working on in therapy and then out in the rest of their life as well.
That's really powerful for you to be able to see it, kind of from both lenses, right? It has to just make the dots connect so beautifully. And, I'll say really cool. as a nurse, I mean, it's interesting when you think of healthcare professionals. So there's even a trauma in the fact that we understand, especially those that are still on the front lines and in patient settings, that there's kind of this constant assault on healthcare professionals' health, right? Whether it's physical with lack of sleep, lack of time to eat, lack of time to use the restroom, and then all of the other people around us traumas that we're constantly absorbing. But we cannot, in many states, have nurses, physicians, PAs, NPs cannot have a diagnosis of anxiety, of panic attacks, of depression, because if you are, your license could be at risk. So for a lot of healthcare professionals, I think the gym has become their therapy, right? And if you can find ways for people then to better process the traumas there, it's probably a safer space for a lot of people, but I'm just thinking of my own paradigm of healthcare. And I think for healthcare professionals, it could be a really safe space to process all that they carry, because every single person working in an inpatient setting has something they're carrying that they need to probably work through, and the gym being a great space to do it. I mean, the gym is completely my mental physical therapy space. And so I think it's a brilliant and beautiful way to combine processing both pieces that are incredibly important. So thank you both for sharing more tangible ways and relatable ways of how that unfolds and how that really looks. This is outside the box, right? You guys are pioneering this. It's something very new. How would you say that people might perceive you as kind of a healthcare rebel in doing this? Is this a kind of a rebellious way of approaching trauma or a rebellious way of approaching fitness?
Yes and no. I think in regards to the healthcare piece, I'm sure you see this all the time because of the space you're in, right? There is more of a move towards accepting more. I hate the word alternative medicine. To be honest, I really reject that frame. I think it's not just because it falls outside of the mainstream of Western medicine doesn't make it alternative, right? A lot of different healing practices that we label as alternative are in fact incredibly historical, right? They're rooted in indigenous practices and Eastern spiritual practices. The history of this stuff is far older than what we recognize in our system. And I think we are tapping into that historical knowledge of the body needs to be central in the healing journey, right? And the connection between mind and body, that we have culturally disconnected them when other cultures have inherently always understood them to be connected. So I think it's important to acknowledge that we are functioning in a system that is reckoning with a disconnection from kind of a truth, right? And a history in terms of bringing in movement and embodied practice into how we care for ourselves, how we foster well-being and resilience, and also how we heal from really hard stuff.
Yeah.
On the exercise side, in terms of being rebellious, absolutely, right? We're not alone. There have been people in this space doing really powerful work around, like, for example, decolonizing fitness spaces and making fitness spaces more inclusive and responsive and things of that sort that have been doing that far longer than we've been doing this. But yes, I think it's radical or rebellious, if you will, in that this is a culture that historically has really benefited from, for example, the trainer or coach client relationship being incredibly hierarchical. It's that kind of like drill sergeant boot camp mentality where you come in, I push you, I know what's best, and then we're done, right? Or no pain, no gain, or, a lot of things that are rooted in things like fat phobia and body shaming and other harmful kind of rhetoric that is really connected to ways of thinking and being that are harmful to everyone.
Yeah.
And we are trying to add, be a voice and a kind of a contributor to a shift in the exercise and fitness world to say, this actually isn't helpful for anyone. And that if we're going to kind of, liberate ourselves, if you will, from some of these narratives that are really harmful and oppressive to everybody, then we got to do some work. And it's not going to bode well when people are making a lot of money off of those narratives taking a stronghold, because if you're shamed around your body through images and diet culture and language and fat phobia and things like that, you are more likely to spend more money. And we're saying, hey, there's a lot of resources out there that don't require that. There's a different way to do this. And so I think in that regard, yes.
Yeah.
And it's so necessary.
Absolutely. Very great points. Thank you, Mariah. Mark, how about you?
I'm going to take a slightly different tact on it, and I'm going to stratify the industry a little bit more. Because even if you look at the medical industry, if you begin to then stratify that, you begin to see subcultures within medicine that are recognizing, acknowledging, leveraging traditional methodology, things like functional medicine, integrative medicine, ancestral health, all of these different subsections of medicine that are going into and looking at centering the body and the mind and the social relationships and so on, lifestyle medicine being another one. Within the fitness space, if you begin to stratify the industry, you begin to see that the gen pop fitness space, the big box type of space that relies on people per square foot, is very much the industry that Mariah was discussing, because that is the true economy of scale and how do you build more and grow on that. But then if you go into smaller spaces where scaling isn't as much of an important factor, and you begin to look at relationship building and sport-specific gyms or something along those lines, you begin to see a lot of the tenets surface because the relationships are centered in the experience versus the number of sessions a person would book or the number of calories someone would burn. So I think is the process that we're doing rebellious? I think it's rebellious in the sense of we're trying to implement it on scale. And we're trying to put it into a larger setting. And so it's not so much rebellious about against the fitness industry as much as it is about the economic structure that the fitness industry lives within.
Sure.
It's like, can we show that and we can summarize the entire experience of being kind to people and recognizing everyone is going through a human experience. Can we show an ROI on that? And can a larger structure say, oh, we can still do our business and be kind to people? And that's kind of the direction that we want to move into, is show that this is not a costly switch from a business perspective, is that you can do both.
Right. Showing value in the softer science of a trauma-informed approach. If somebody wants to find out more about either one of you or trauma-informed weightlifting, where can they seek out more information on becoming a trauma-informed individual, practitioner, trainer, coach, professional, and or work with you specifically?
So I can speak trauma-informed weightlifting. The nice thing is the website is just that. It's trauma-informedweightlifting.com. We're also on Instagram. Same thing. Trauma-informed weightlifting is our handle on Instagram. We don't email often. So if you want to stay in the loop, Instagram or signing up for our emails on our website are the best way to stay in the loop around things that are happening when we make announcements. And then for me, my website is Mariah Rooney, LICSW.com. And that's where people can reach me if they're interested in exploring therapy, or I do a lot of consultation with systems and with individuals. I work with kids and adults, and then do a variety of other projects, but those things are all on my website. So that would be a way to get in touch with me.
Okay. Thank you. Mark?
Right now, the easiest, in addition to what Mariah said about trauma-informed-weightlifting.com and Instagram, the easiest place to find me would be website at Live It Better, L-I-V as in Victor, I-T, better.com. Eventually, my gym website will exist, but for now, I don't know what the timeline is on that. So Live It Better will link over if you need anything on that front.
Okay, perfect. And if you're interested in taking part of the Trauma-Informed Weightlifting Workshop at the Self-Esteem Brand headquarters, which is February 17 and 18, you can go to the Trauma-Informed Weightlifting website and register there. And that's going to be more specifically geared for those in the health and wellness and fitness space who are coaches and or trainers. So you can find out more information about that workshop there. If you'd like to learn more about the Point Retreats, you can find us on our Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn handle, and on our website at thepointretreats.com. Otherwise, I want to say a heartfelt thank you to Mariah and Mark for all of the really incredible information that you just shared in our hour together here. You're obviously both very heart-centered individuals who are deeply passionate about this work, and I applaud you for that because it is needed now more than ever. So thank you for being very intentional in what you're bringing forward in this world. Otherwise, I hope all of you listening today that our episode has inspired you to think about new ways that you can rebel and be well.
You've been listening to the Rebel and Be Well podcast, hosted by Christa, Rymal, registered nurse, founder, and CEO of Lifestyle Medicine Retreat Center, The Point Retreats, which is located amidst the woods and waters of northern Minnesota. If you'd like to ask Christa Rymal, or one of our past or upcoming guests, a question that will be aired on a future show, simply call 612-352-9177 and leave a message. Please know that when you leave a message, it may be used in whole or in part on a future podcast episode. Again, that phone number is 612-352-9177. Please hit subscribe on whatever podcast source you found us on and rate and review our show. We'd love to hear feedback. Rebel and Be Well is recorded at the studios of Minnesota Podcasting, located in St. Paul, Minnesota. Find them online at mnpodcasting.com. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the individual participants alone and do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the Point Retreats, Minnesota Podcasting, or any other organization. All medical issues, concerns, diagnoses, medications, and treatments must be managed by your doctor. We do not replace any clinician's medical advice or treatment. Join us next time for Rebel and Be Well.